So hello there. Welcome to Live with Lynn. It's good to see you today. So today I'm going to talk about how I left my 9-to-5 job and how I transitioned into a full-time Avon business. So, back then, this was like 18, well, no, I guess it was probably about 15 years ago that I left my job. But 2006, actually, however many years ago that was. But I had a fantastic job. I had worked my way up in the company. It was a food service distributor, and I pretty much could write my own ticket. I mean, it started off, I've had many, many years of experience as a buyer. And when I started at that company, I was unknown in California because I had come from Utah. So I ended up having to start as a clerk. It was the only way I could find a job in California. But I worked my way up quickly, became buyer of equipment and supplies. And then I decided we had a catalog for the whole company, where it would say 6-pound bag of flour or 1 pound of butter or whatever. And restaurants knew what that was, but I was buying equipment and supplies. I was buying dishes and plates and refrigerators and tables. And I felt like people needed to see what it was. I mean, how do you know what this pattern is unless you see it, right? So I started a marketing department kind of on the side of my regular job. And I created a food and equipment catalog, or equipment and supplies catalog, where it had pictures. And I mean, that was a huge project. But over time, I transitioned and built a marketing department, and to the point where they had to replace me as a buyer, and I became director of marketing. So I was in a position at that company, I pretty much could write my own ticket. And leaving, I mean, I had built up this Avon business. I had built it up to where I was making almost as much in Avon at the time as I was in my day job. And I was terrified to leave, though, because I had a regular paycheck. I knew I could depend on my paycheck. I was working an awful lot of hours, and, I had a lot of responsibility. But, I mean, it's a trade-off, right? So the universe kind of pushed me out. That's a whole nother story. But some things started happening at work that kind of pushed me out of the job. And I knew that I had Avon to fall back on. So I finally took that jump, and I finally left my full-time job and went full-time Avon. So now I don't have a job to go to. I don't have that paycheck to depend on. What am I going to do? Oh my gosh. Yeah, I already had a good Avon business. It was already still going strong, but now I knew that it was on my shoulders. Now I had to make things happen if I was going to bring money in, right? And I was just terrified of it. And so first thing I did was I thought, I need to be proactive. I need to do something. And so I started a route. There was a section in Ventura that was a whole bunch of offices down this street, like mostly medical offices, doctor's offices. There was like some billing office, like all different, just like an office complex area. And so I took a basket, just a regular basket, and you buy it at a thrift store for like $1, and I filled it full of samples and stuff. And I had brochures, and I went to these offices, and I just walked in the office, and I said, "Hi, I'm Lynn with Avon. I've got free Avon for you. Pick what you want out of this basket." And a lot of times they'd be like, "Really? Free? What's free?" And I'm like, "Just pick what you want." And they're like, "Well, what's the catch?" And I'm like, "No catch." So, and I would give them samples, and I would say, "Is it okay if I leave a brochure?" And then I would get their name. I would get the receptionist's name, and I kind of had a clipboard with a notepad on it, and I would write, the address at the top of the page, and then suite number 101, and I would write the clerk's name, the receptionist's name there, and how many books I left. Or, every once in a while I would get somebody to say, "You can't do that, you can't solicit in here." And I would just say, "Okay, sorry, no problem." And then I would write on my note, don't come back here, right? And so I did this. It was the scariest thing I ever did. I was so terrified. And the first couple of offices, I was like, oh man, I'd stand outside the office and was just terrified to go in there. But you know what? After a couple, that's the thing. If you're afraid of something, the easiest way to get over your fear is to get into action. Whatever it is you're afraid of, the easiest thing is to get into action. And so for me, getting in there and doing it and going to the first office, and then the second office, and then the third office, it got a lot easier. And some people were rude, but I would say 95% of them were not. 95% of them were happy to get free samples, happy to get a brochure, happy for me to leave brochures there. And then I would tell them, if it's okay with you, I'll come back in 2 weeks and see if there's anything I can order for you. You know, I mean, for the route, that's how I did it. So I would go in there every 2 weeks. So basically, over time, I developed it into, I would go there, I'd pick up any orders and deliver any orders I had, you know, so they just knew that I was coming every 2 weeks. And that's how I developed that for the route. And that gave me, I had control at that point. See, I wasn't just sitting back going, I hope somebody calls me. Because that doesn't work. You know, you have to, if you're going to start any kind of business, doesn't matter what it is, you have to take responsibility for it. Well, over time, I built this so I had a route like every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and it really only took about 2 hours of my time to do this each day. But over time, you know, like a year down the road, I kind of knew who was ordering, who wasn't, and I started putting them on my mailing list rather than going and doing the route every 2 weeks, right? But then I started a new one. I mean, recently, Richard and I, we decided we needed to build more business, and so there's a hospital not far from us that has a whole medical building attached, and so Richard and I did the same thing then. We started at the top. This is something we learned. Little trick, if you're in Avon or if you're in any other business, little trick we learned, start at the top and work your way down. Because then if someone tells you you have to leave, they're not going to question why you're going up to the next floor. When instead you go down to the bottom, to the floor below you, they think you're leaving, right? We tend to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. But, I mean, we weren't doing anything wrong. The offices loved having us come by. We didn't interrupt. I mean, if they were talking to someone, we stood back, and we were very courteous. And, you know, we don't interrupt their business. We keep their business is most important for them, right? And so we don't interrupt it. Another thing I did when I was first getting started was I stood outside a grocery store. I would have in my arm, I would have 15 brochures or so. I would have what we call drawing slips. These are little slips that customers can fill out and give me their contact information. And as they were walking out of the store, I'd say, hey, would you like an Avon brochure? And a lot of people wouldn't look at me. A lot of people said no. A lot of people were like, oh, I don't want to talk to her. She's a peddler. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. But then there was a lot of people that said, yes, Avon. Or some people would walk by, they'd go no and walk by, take 3 steps and then turn around and go, Avon? Yes. So, and then as I give them a book, I tell them, well, I mail my brochures. Would you like to get one in the mail? Would you like to get on my mailing list? And sometimes they'd say no. And I'd say, well, that's okay. My name's on the back of the book. And sometimes they'd say yes. And I would have them fill out that little drawing slip. And so this is how I built my business. It's all about getting out there. It's all about taking action and not sitting back hoping someone's going to call you, because they're not going to call you if you're just sitting back. I mean, and then once I have the customer, then that's a whole nother process. Then I have a whole nother process that I do. And I've talked about that in my videos as far as follow-up and staying in touch and making sure everybody gets a brochure. But so that's how I left my business. Truth is, I was terrified to leave it. The universe had to push me out. That's a whole nother story. Maybe one day I'll tell you about that. But they had to push me out, and I finally said okay, and I made the decision, and I left my job, and I got into business, and I just found a way to make it happen, you know. And then once I quit my job, 2 years later, Richard was able to retire from his job. And we were debt free. What an amazing life. And so I haven't worked since 2006. I haven't worked since 2004. I'm sorry. And Richard hasn't worked since 2006, I believe. So I can't complain. I have a great life. Anyway, thanks for being here with me today. And today is actually Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to all you fathers out there. And I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.